Well, good morning. I'm going to share, what I've been working on the last 10 years, what the podcast was originally for, to help me heal and understand. So I've been working on this, so let me just share. Well, no further ado, here's the podcast. From uranium mines to Unbreakable, a decade of hell and the stack that saved me. Imagine being Job. Not the Sunday school version, but the real one. Skin on fire, sores weeping, everyone around you losing faith while you're left clawing for answers. Well, that was me. Born on a uranium mine, my dad hauling glowing rock while I took a traumatic brain injury as a kid. That rewired my brain before I could spell my name. Then came the allergies. Eggs, grass, mold, oats, chocolate, preservatives, my immune system turning on me like a paranoid guard dog. Hidradenitis suppurativa followed, a skin disease so brutal I had a softball-sized abscess in my hip, making it impossible to sit, stand, or walk. Had joint pain, fatigue, anxiety, dyslexia, and a government hounding me for student loans I couldn't pay after they promised me help that never came. 10 years of invisible hell. Longer, actually. The healing to figure out what was HS was 10 years, but it's a 25-year journey to where we are. Right? So decades where doctors laughed at my cures and my suffering, where dermatologists didn't even look at my skin, where I was told there was nothing more to be done. They were wrong. I'm still here, not just alive, but unbreakable. And I did it with a stack I built from the ashes of their neglect. An antihistamine, a modern antihistamine, mint tea, probiotics, vitamin D, B12, a modified keto diet, fasting, and decaf espresso with ghee. This isn't a miracle cure ad. It's a war story. It's what happens when you're forced to become your own doctor, your own scientist, your own darn savior, because no one else will. Picture this. I'm a kid growing up in a town where they mine the uranium here in Canada. The can-do reactor made us famous, and, well, someone had to mine that uranium. That was my father. And I lived in the dust, played in the dust. I remember I used to have this little Bronco that I could sit on. I was kind of a small guy, but I could sit on it and ride it around in the dirt. Our entire yard was dirt, no grass. I never connected that until later when my father told me that we had to avoid going to an island on one of the lakes in northern Ontario because it used to be a uranium mine, a really old uranium mine. But imagine, I was growing up playing, living in the dirt of a uranium mine. But it wasn't till I was in my later years that I was warned that being around uranium dirt was a danger. So imagine being raised in a haze of heavy metal dust that might have primed my body for revolt. The traumatic brain injury at 6 left my nervous system jumpy, hypersensitive to the childhood trauma and later drama that kept piling on. By my teens, I was allergic to the world, so reactive my folks skipped vaccines. No, not my folks, my doctors recommended that I not have vaccines. Pardon me, that was a mistake in the scripting. No, my allergies were so severe, I had an allergist and immunologist until I was in my early teens. And I did not get vaccines because it would have been a real problem, right? Back then it was just because of my allergies, particularly my allergies to eggs. But what we realize now is my predisposition to inflammation would have also been an issue, right? My body would have overreacted, maybe caused a cytokine storm. It could have been really bad, right? So then my HS hit. This is hidradenitis suppurativa, abscesses, sinus tracts, a dermatologist, scribbling stage 1 without a glance. He didn't even look at my skin, right? Stage 1 is no sinus tracts. I was actually there because I had such a severe sinus tract that it was constantly draining. So that's how I got my doctor to get me into a dermatologist. I showed him how I had to resort to using bandanas for Band-Aids because it was just too much blood, too much sebum, too much area to cover. Right? But still, we didn't get there. My GP, 20 years took him to stop laughing at probiotics. When I told him about mast cell and maybe histamine intolerance, he laughed and said that I wouldn't be able to function. Well, he was wrong. I mean, mast cell and histamine sensitivity is not on or off. It's on a spectrum, right? But until I dragged myself to the ER, crippled by that hip abscess, and forced a consult that cracked the diagnosis open. Right, what happened was I got brought into the ER, went into the ER because the abscess was so bad I just couldn't function. So when they were draining it, what shocked the doctors was the draining of the abscess didn't bother me as much as moving, right, my joints and my hip pain, particularly. So they sent me for ultrasound and x-rays. And that's how they realized it was an autoinflammatory disease. So I got a dermatologist consult the next time I was into the ER for draining. Imagine having a doctor, but needing to go to the ER to be diagnosed for this. So the one doctor, again, feeling for me, my pain and my suffering, got a dermatology consult. And with my dyslexia, I have a hard time picking up phonemes. So what ended up happening is I didn't know what they had said. It took me a long time to figure out, about a month of heavy Googling to figure out what the disease was. I finally found it. Imagine not giving it to me, not writing it down and sending me, right? Like, it's just the level of Kafkaesqueness in Canada and how bad our medical system is. Nobody will understand. It's absolutely abhorrent how bad it is. Because keep in mind, every time I went to the hospital, you know what they told me? Oh, you're lucky you didn't get whatever that flesh-eating disease. Supposedly a lot of people with my disease end up getting it, probably because they're at the hospital a million times. That's not me, though, right? So let's just say I've experienced a lot of malpractice, right? The dermatologist didn't even look at my skin, yet diagnosed me as stage 1, which, well, as I told him, I was referred because of sinus tracts. So that's just malpractice. My own doctor then, after having told me there was nothing more he could do, having just treated my symptoms for over 10 years, next time I went, all of a sudden, oh, I have other HS patients. I've been treating them for years. This is the same doctor that laughed at me when I told him about the microbiome. Laughed at me when I told him how much benefit I was getting from probiotics. And I had to force him to write down the brand of probiotics because I figured out it needed to be a multi-spectrum one, right? With the probiotics and the prebiotics. I had to force him to write it down, right? This is the same doctor that laughed at me later years, a couple years later. Oh no, I've been treating HS patients. Really? Well, what about me? You weren't treating me. Or how about the mast cell? Like, imagine telling me that set me back a couple of years, because if I had gone down that road of the mast cell, I could have made him famous. We would have figured all this out by then, but it took years. And in that time, I don't know if he got sick or had a stroke or what it is, but like I said, he had to retire an emergency, really. And imagine he retired in an emergency literally just months after we finally figured out an antihistamine that's really seriously changed my life. But so here we are, right? Neglect doesn't cover it. Malpractice dressed up as apathy, or my doctor's point, he just said he didn't have time for his patients. But, well, he also told me that he had to whittle his practice down because he had too many patients. He had 5,000 patients. He had to whittle it down to like 3,300. But do the math. That means you only get, and this was my life, you only get to see your doctor once a year, because that's 10 appointments a day with 3,300 patients. Yeah. Is it any wonder we only get 5 minutes? Or worse, my doctor actually had some compassion. He'd give me maybe even as much as 15 minutes to figure out what we were dealing with. But again, it was always me telling him what we were doing. But then I'd have to deal with the attitude of his secretaries, because I put them behind 5 or 10 minutes. Like, don't book 40 people in a day. But that's our healthcare system. It is Kafkaesque. I've been treated by the government's Kafkaesque. This disease is very Kafkaesque. It's very much Job's story, but I guess, well, that's problematic if you consider it the same. I digress. So I took over at this point. I cracked PubMed paywalls with extensions. I was dyslexic, half blind with my Erland syndrome and my astigmatism, teaching myself to read at a grad level when I'd once been functionally illiterate. I found rupatadine, a mast cell taming antihistamine that's been my miracle for the last 6 months. Calms the itch, but more so the flares, the chaos, the pain, the abscesses. Right? And imagine how this came about. My doctor recommended a different antihistamine. And so I said, well, why not this one? Because I can get it over the counter for $15 for 200. He's like, okay, go ahead. And after that didn't work out, it just caused me to gain 20 pounds, and be very tired. So I went and looked at some of these other choices. He gave me a list of these that he thought could work, but didn't mention the rupatadine. And that shocks me because it had that additional PF factor. What it does has an extra benefit that would help me directly. No, it didn't mention it. So I called it his secretary or his assistant, and I lied, and I said that he mentioned it. And I said, can I get the prescription for that and give that a try? So that's how I lucked out on rupatadine. I found it. I recommended it. It really is quite sad, but another story was, I told my doctor what was keeping me alive long before we figured out what it was, right? I was brewing gallons of mint tea, drinking a gallon a day of mint tree, strong, packed with DAO to mop up my histamine, hydrating my wrecked body while soothing inflammation. I discovered that by looking up a study on holy basil, Tulsi. And they found it had DAO, and most doctors treating mast cell and histamine intolerance recommend pea shoots, which are high in DAO. But what I discovered is, well, if you drank mint tea all day, you're getting your hydration and you're getting your DAO. Tulsi's not as nice to be drinking all day. It's nice. It's got a little licorice flavor to it, but I don't know. I'd have to do a little research, but mint tea you can drink all day. I think Tulsi might be a little much for all day long. But when I told my doctor this, he just ignored it. And I've run this through the AI, and it's a groundbreaking idea. So really, the doctor could have published just that alone, but we go on. There's way more than that. So probiotics rebuilt my gut, where HS and allergies fester. Vitamin D and B12 patch holes from chronic stress and deficiency. D for my immune system, B12 for my nerves. I hacked keto, low carb, but loaded with broccoli, cauliflower, leafy greens, good fats from ghee, not bacon, because inflammation doesn't care about trans. Well, no, that's not true. Bacon's not bad as long as you don't do too much of it and it doesn't have all the extra chemicals. If you're just using, bacon with not the fake smoke and all that stuff. Yes, it's a little higher in salt, but here's a little tip. Most of us are actually fairly low in salt, so it's not as big a deal. Bacon fat is not as bad as many people think. But really, what the AI should have said was having ghee and tallow rather than, chemical extracted seed oils, right? There's a lot of people saying how bad seed oils are, but like hemp seed oil is one of the best oils, period. That's how I was breaking my fast. A little cup of hemp seed oil at lunch after having not ate since the day before. I'll have my bulletproof coffee in the morning. I hack it by, it's a decaf espresso with coconut milk and ghee. I think much more healthier because, we can go into that another time, but caffeine and dark coffee is not really the greatest when you have inflammation and immune issues. But I digress again. My apologies. But I hacked the keto because at the time when I was learning, they were eating no vegetables at all. Now it's the carnivore bent. But what I realized is those weren't the carbs they have to worry about. It's sugar, it's pastas and breads. Leafy greens, cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, I mean, these are actually really good, really healthy for your microbiome. And the carbs are really not that bad. I mean, it's the whole carb and fiber. But imagine that no one saw this as a major issue. Now, some of the keto people are saying that you can go ahead with some of those vegetables because they're not a negative carb. But at the time, right? And I even told my doctor, he wasn't very supportive, but I told him, I said, no, I'm not going to crazy keto, 85% fat. What I'm talking about is low carb. And I told him about that, right? Burning fat over glucose and the low free radicals and all that stuff. And again, it was all ignored, but science has caught up to me, right? But that's the idea, right? Not messing with your cortisol, not messing with your inflammation. Now I have to worry about mast cells and histamine, right? So this is what all this hacking is about. So this stack, it's not random. It's years in the making. It's a full spectrum fight. Rupatadine and mint tea hit the histamine and the mast cells from skin to gut. Probiotics and keto starve the inflammation while feeding what's left of me, but I run really, really well on fat. Fasting clears the junk. Vitamins plug the gaps. Vitamins, supplements, mostly vitamins and minerals. I don't take any other type of supplement, really. It's not one disease, it's all of them. A tangle of trauma, uranium exposure, immune system that's betraying itself. It's all made my life unbearable for over a decade. It's longer than that, a couple decades. If I'd had just HS or just allergies, I might have settled. But the weight of it all, skin lesions, joint pain, fatigue, anxiety, dyslexia, debt collectors, lying to my boss, forced me to dig deeper. I couldn't live like that, so I decided I wouldn't. That's the real lesson of Job. Not the patience, not the blind faith, but this. No one's going to do it for you. God didn't fix Job's sores. His friends didn't lift a finger. His wife told him to curse and die. He endured, but he had to face it alone. My wife stuck with me, but everyone else bailed. Doctors lost faith. The government chased me for loans they promised would be grants. Collection agents trashed my name. Even my GP, after 20 years, said nothing more I can do. But I could. I decided to live long before the stack. But it was just the how. This is my introduction. Not a cure, but a fight. The uranium kid with sores and no answers. The dyslexic who outread his doctors. The guy who turned mint tea and ghee into armor. The protocol is real. Second generation antihistamines, mint tea all day, probiotics, D, vitamin D, B12, veggie keto. I like that, veggie keto. Fasting, ghee espresso, a hack on the bulletproof coffee idea. But the grit's the story. 10 years of heck, and I'm still here. If you're in your own decade of sores, invisible or not, this is for you. No one's coming, but you can.